What? I'll be sitting over here. Oh, okay.
Are you kidding me? Really? Um, what is it? It's on Thursday nights. It's called the Capstone class. Just a second. CS 50.32 Web and Digital Media Projects. Here it is.
that would have to come before.
Have you already taken A and B? Oh, I'm sorry. You've already done that. You're doing C now, so then you've taken all the other prerequisites and everything?
I'm taking. So,
Well, they have all the prerequisites for this, for the ones I just showed you, for the CS, whatever. Well, if you've been in, well, it all depends, because you have people who are doing websites, so if you go into it for this semester, look in it for this semester, and print out the section.
Hey, what's up? It's Tuesday.
So look in there and it was there. So it just gives you, you can just open it up and look. Go back, okay. Yeah, go right there. Now, it'll tell you prerequisites, and it says here prerequisites. What programmers these are for? Digital filmmaking, these are. See what I'm saying? So 74, that might be interesting for the digital media, I'm not sure. Check it out. See. Yep. And that's the one that John teaches. No, but it's really good. That was the first class I took. Really got me used to all the different.
yeah, they're not gonna get one more semester, so. They extend things at what time it's going to do it all. And then
So few of you. I'm upset. Have we winnowed it down to this few now?
The cool kids are like,
All the cool kids are staying behind. Okay. So yeah, if you haven't already gotten the idea, why don't you start downloading things from the server, and I will rattle off names real quickly, and we'll see who's here. Heather. Really? Oh, she's okay.
Oh, her car.
Alan. So Alan, yes. David is not in. Julian. Oh my goodness. Alex, I saw he did walk out. Logan. Yeah. No. Okay. Celine, you're back there. I saw Peter earlier. He must be. Okay. Well, he'll probably be along. Ilana, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. Elliot Lane. Yeah, there you are. Lucas.
Here.
Yep. Elliot Murphy, saw you earlier. Heather Murray, Lariva. Evan won't be here. I know that much. Wiley? No? He's in the lab. So everyone's like freaking out in the lab right now. Does somebody need to run down there and say, just come up and talk to Randy as opposed to freaking out down in the lab? All right. And Colin. Yeah. Quansiva. Naomi's out. Josh. And Ben. All right. My goodness. Look at all these missing people. I'll give them a couple more minutes to walk in the door and materialize, and then we're going to get started. So to pass the time, however briefly, I wanted to say that, you know, this is one of the weeks that's going to be nice in that we will get to revisit, and I'm going to recap a lot of what we talked about last week. So just to make sure, because the majority of the class period is going to be spent doing a technique in class, and we'll get to what it is in a few minutes, but I just want to make sure that you guys are comfortable with. I mean, I know your homework you got to do some of that, but also I'm planning on this week having you be able to focus more on being hands-on and having me answer questions and being able to accomplish something in class as opposed to only feeling like I sit up here and talk. Because last week was a lot of me talking. So this week won't be quite as much. There is still plenty of content to give you for this week, so don't freak out that it's going to be a phoned-in week. But this is one of those, I actually have a few extra weeks, so I can take the time here, because these are 3D animation, and After Effects is important enough and difficult and challenging enough that we can spend a little time on this as opposed to racing through it and pushing forward to the next thing, and then you're like, wait, what? And then you don't feel like you got anything out of it. So there you are, sir. That's all right. I heard there's a small mob of you downstairs in the second floor lab that will hopefully be along. All right. So yeah, that's the short answer is this week is we're going to revisit a lot of the 3D stuff that we talked about last week. I do have your questions as well and more. So stand by. So yeah, again, the drill hopefully now has been repeated often enough that when you walk in, you log in, you download this week's folder onto your desktop, and then we can get started. Okay, so week 10. Not that many weeks left. This is good. And you'll notice that now that it's after this festival's over and I've had spring break for my school last week, super chill now. I know kind of where we're headed for the end of the year. That's good. Makes me happy anyway. So hopefully you will, again, I have some capacity to reformulate and get things organized so that we have a strong finish. You guys feel like you got something done. and I can give you a grade that everybody agrees with, and we are all happy and kumbaya. All right. So this week's agenda is relatively short, but important. I wanted to do a check-in on semester projects. We're going to do questions from last week, and then we'll recap 3D animation so far, and then we're going to, tonight's new information will be making 3D from 2D or 2.5D is the technique that we'll go through tonight. And then the in-class portion will be from the week 10 folder so that you guys can play a lot with it. We can pick apart a good example that's complete, and then I'll give you a basic one that isn't complete, and you get to work on that one in class. Okay. There's no lesson in Lynda for this. For doing what we're doing in class. They don't really talk about this technique in lynda.coms at all. So what we're doing here is kind of the way I learned it. And but I found some cool examples. I found a cool example that I'll show you in this slide presentation when we get to the 3D or 2.5D work. Yes.
Does that mean we're going to take this file and then turn it in for our homework?
No, you do have homework. It's not, but just that the technique I'm going to show you tonight is not in the homework. This is something completely separate, but it utilizes all of the techniques that we've talked about in terms of 3D animation so far. Okay. So that's why. Okay. All right. So semester projects. As a reminder, this is a significant portion of your grade. Of your project grade. So it's not something you want to put off until 2 weeks before and try and slap together. So here's where I think you should be at this point. You may or may not be here, and depending on how many of these things you have or have not done, your freak out quotient may increase. And that's okay. Just breathe. It'll all be fine. So here's where I think you guys should be. You guys should generally have, because we did sound mixing early on, hopefully you've applied some of that knowledge to work on the sound mix in the semester project, because the music that plays and the interview audio is wildly out of balance right now. It needs to be brought into balance. So how you go about doing that is part of one of the things that you should have at least started, but in my mind it should be done because you're moved on to other things. Room tone, if you felt that the need to create it, there's not a lot of, I don't think I provided you with any room tone. So if you were to, you'd have to create it, and that's not a trivial thing. So if you were to use it in terms of, if there were periods where you didn't want to have music and all you had was interview audio, you would have to have something, because when there's no interview audio, it would be complete silence, and that will definitely attract the audience's ear. So you want to, if you're not going to have a music bed underneath your interview or your dialogue when you're chopping it up, you need to insert room tone or you need to cover it. So you should have color work well in hand, either in process or done, mostly, and that includes both interview and B-roll. The interview is, you could probably do one color effect on the master clip for the interviews, and then for any of the B-roll, you want to make sure that you just make it viewable, visible. Some of the clips are really dark. At least one of the clip was shot with the wrong white balance, so see what you can do. There's a lower third that should be either in process or done, because we introduce the guy that's on the interview and he has a lower third. That lower third needs to be created. There's a quarantine press release. I don't remember if I gave you that press release or not.
No, you did.
Okay, so I will, okay, and that's fine. I'll give you, I will put up on Canvas, and I'll try and make sure that I get up on the server, what that press release looks like. It is actually a web page off of CDFA that you can click to print, and then you take that, and then that becomes the image that was used in this. But I'm open to some different approaches to how to do news clippings or something along those lines, how you highlight certain words depending on what you're trying to show. Yeah, there's a food desk motion graphic. This is a huge one. This one is going to take some time. You should be planning it. You might have started work on it. I'm not betting on that, but there's the discussion that's over right now that motion graphic is not in place. You need to create one, and it needs to catalog how many food deaths. And you hear it in the dial, or you hear it in the interview audio that talks about, you know, there was so many such and such from eating lettuce, and there's some from or leafy greens, and you know, ice cream, pasteurized ice cream and cheese. You know, it's like so there's that whole sequence in the film where you need to create some kind of motion graphic sequence that's going to visually tell me why what, you know, the impact of food deaths by type, what kind of, or deaths that were caused by food, and the fact that no deaths have happened from eating raw milk. That's kind of the thing that comes from this. And that was when I remember when I had to build that, I was like, how the hell am I going to impart that this is a huge deal and have it be visual? I said, oh, I can have spinning numbers, and then, you know, it drops on the screen, and then you just see them mounting, and then you get to the bottom and you realize, oh, nobody's died drinking this stuff. So what's the big deal? And then ad credits, you can, you should probably have you're at least thinking about, if not started, the end credits. End credits are relatively easy. I don't know if I provided you end credits, or did I pull them? If I pulled them, you should replace them because they're pretty awful to begin with. But they can be roll credits, so they can be end cards, like just cards, 5 seconds on the screen. I think I told you guys how long roll credits are supposed to be on the screen. Does anybody remember? Well, there's actually a time from the moment that somebody's name appears on the bottom of the screen to the time that it disappears from the top of the screen. The elapsed time is 8 seconds. Okay, so, and you can almost always set your watch to that. If you watch a Hollywood film, that is the speed of the roll credits, such that somebody's name emerges on the bottom and it will disappear off the top in 8 seconds. And that is just how it is done. So if you want something, and I think I mentioned that if you watch these, if you set your speed of your end credits to that speed and you watch it, you're like, wow, that looks a lot like a Hollywood film. And there's a reason. Okay. And then the opening intro, which is the introduction to the film, there's motion graphics there, but that actually is going to, if you'd like to, it's going to utilize techniques that we're going to talk about next week or the week after, which is basically camera tracking, which we haven't done yet, and we will do next week. Okay. So, and that's a lot of fun, interesting. You can do all kinds of fun things there. Yes.
So I know you said that this cannot be over 10 minutes, I think you said?
Yeah, the film that I provided you is 7 minutes.
7 minutes, okay. But is there a minimum if we're going to change? Like,
why would you change anything? That was a whole, well, okay. I won't say that. Let me back that up. I don't mean to be quite so forward about it, but the point of the class, if you remember, is that editing is not, you're not supposed to be adding or removing frames at this point. So the point of this project is to finish the film. You have a fine cut that has all of the footage that you need, including B-roll, interview. It just needs to be finished, meaning you need to add, you need to do sound work, you need to do color work, you need to do motion graphics work, and any effects. And that's the content of the class.
Okay, I just thought I heard something a little bit different at the beginning of the class.
Yes, and this,
you could change certain things to make the theme of the film be a little different. So
that was,
did I hear that?
In previous years, previous classes, we're trying something out, first of all. But in previous years, we tried it where we let students bring their own projects, but it was wildly varied. The content that was provided was very, it was a lot harder to judge exactly how did you demonstrate all of the skills that we want you to know as part of this class. Whereas if we give you this project and we say, did you do this? Did you do this? We know that you're going to do a lower third. We know that you're going to do motion graphics. We know that you're going to do color work and sound work. And I can make sure that all of that's in this project such that, and again, I don't want to watch these films 30 times, well, 23 times, because that's how many students are in the class. But I don't want to watch this film 23 more times, but I'm going to, because you're all each going to provide this a version of my film that you've finished for this class. Does that make any sense? I mean, it used to be that if you brought your own project, it couldn't be longer than 10 minutes. That's where that 10-minute figure came from. That's why. Because I didn't want to watch somebody's 20-minute film to judge it and have to scan through 20 minutes of footage or 20 minutes of film to find where the evidence of your work was done. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to jump all over that right away, but it was like, yeah.
No. I just thought I heard something that said, well, students have done different things so that there's a little bit different focus on the film once it's finished. So that's what I had heard. So
okay.
it doesn't sound like that's the case.
No.
Okay.
Not this round. And I mean, and I've had students who've taken the original film that I provided and done significant rework of the intro sequence. The intro sequence, if you guys recut the intro sequence, I would actually could see that as working, because it's just right now it's just scenes, a couple of shots that are static, or mostly static. Some of them are pans and other things, but there's no text, there's nothing else happening. It's just, you're on a farm, you're in a grocery store, you're on a farm, you're in a grocery store, you're on a farm, you're in a grocery store, film starts. That's it in terms of the opening sequence of the film. But how you put your, how you reveal parts of the film, like who directed it, who produced it, and so on. And so all of that piece of information. Again, if you ever need to see the project from the point of view of what I produced, just search for Utterly Direct on Vimeo, and it's the only one there. I think there should be a version of it somewhere in Canvas that you can watch as well, if you want to see what my film that went out to film festivals looked like. Again, that will give you at least some kind of, indicator as to, that's kind of how it's going to be judged in terms of what was done on the film. I already talked too much about this. Okay.
So
does that help?
If we look at your final version, we'll see the editing that you've done after the version that you're giving us, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Because all I did was I took the film that I produced and I stripped out all of the motion graphics, sound work, color work. Yeah. Okay. All right. Phew, boy, that took longer than I thought. Okay, so let's quickly get through some of these questions from last week. There was a couple questions that were asked that I responded individually to that I don't think were relevant to put up on the screen. So if you got that, you should have gotten it in Canvas. Or if you don't see your question up here, you can come see me at the break, and I'll probably have an explanation for why that is. What's a null object in After Effects? So the short answer here is a null object is it's an invisible layer that doesn't render when you put it onto when you render out your composition. But it does have properties that you can animate, including all of the transform properties, position, rotation, etc., as scale, transparency, or opacity, etc. All of those become interesting when you use null objects as the parent layer for another layer. So when you animate a null object that has child layers attached to it, then interesting things happen, because that null object becomes the thing that controls these other things, these other layers in your comp. So that's the short answer. It is invisible. All you see on screen is a little red square, but that red square will not render on the final output. It's just inside of the composition viewer. So just be aware of that, okay? What's the easiest way to make a title spin in 3D? Well, that's depends on how you want to spin it, really. Easiest way would be to keyframe the rotation property of any layer. It is now what we haven't talked about, and we'll get to not this week, but perhaps next week, is the render engines that After Effects uses. The default one that we've been using to this point is called Classic 3D. And Classic 3D, I think I mentioned this, is it treats your layers like they were very thin sheets of paper, almost infinitesimally small in terms of thinness, so that if you ever turned your camera, or if you ever turned a layer on edge facing a camera, it would be invisible. So there's no pixel thickness to a layer when you're looking at it on its side. So everything is thin. When you talk about, there's a different render engine in After Effects called Ray Trace 3D. That one, you can actually create geometry from layers. You can give layers thicknesses. You can texture them such that they seem more like they actually have, you know, depth and heft and weight to them. All of that is at a cost, and we can talk about what that cost is down the road. But the short answer is that the easiest way to make a title spin in 3D is to set your anchor point where you want it to spin around, and then animate the position, you know, properties for those, you know, for that object, so that it spins the way you want. I mean, when you animate something, we'll get to another point in here also where we start to talk about expressions. I know that you've had some work with one of your homework assignments to this point, I think, had expressions involved. We will have more time to talk about how expressions work in After Effects as well, and that can be another way to easily make your layers or your objects animate automatically over time. I accidentally set up black as the color of my light. Why would this be useful in any project? What good is a black light? Okay, this one actually requires a demo. So here, let me turn off the light real quick. I set up a real quick project to demonstrate this, and I played around with it. So the problem that happens is, you know, if you don't have a light in a scene, what ends up happening is that the layers are lit with a default ambient light, okay? Meaning that it suffuses the entire area and it lights everything evenly. That's what an ambient light does, and that's what your default light is if you don't have a light in your 3D composition, or if it's invisible. Like if you've hit the hide, you've hit the visibility icon or the button, and you've turned off the light. If you add a light, then suddenly, you know, you have properties, you have light fall off, you have, in this case with a spotlight, it has a cone, it has a fall off radius, it has a fall off in terms of distance from the objects that it's lighting, so that if we were to move it away, you see that it gets dimmer, and as it gets closer, it brightens. So, you know, there's this that sense that light, you know, behaves like you would expect. The problem that you run into is that the color, when you mess with color, you'll see that you can change the color to be all kinds of different hues, including black. So black actually behaves substantially like you've turned the light off or transparent. it is, and I didn't know the answer to this, so I tried this. That's why I was like, wait, what is, I'm not sure. What is the difference here? But what I noticed is that as soon as you start to lift the light, and you can't tell on the projector, but once you get the light to, you know, up into the gray just a little bit, you start to see the edge of the object. And if we move the light closer, sorry, I gotta jump through a couple of hoops here. If we move the light closer, it becomes clear right away. So go back to this, click on that. So even if you have a black light, if it's all the way to 0, you're not going to see anything. If you see just a little bit, I mean, even if it's just the darkest shade of gray, you still get some light out of that light layer. So the short answer is there's no reason why you would want a black light. It doesn't make things glow fluorescent. It's not that kind of thing, but it is just a, you know, the way that color works and the way that light works in After Effects. This becomes a kind of an additional knob you can, or setting you can do in addition to the intensity and other settings of the light to shape the intensity of the light itself and how it behaves. So if we go back to a full white, you know, the other, if we were to go over here and, oh, how interesting. When you go to a layer and you press T, the shortcut letter T, you get opacity, okay? When you hit the light and you press the letter T, you get intensity, which is basically the same as opacity from the point of view of how bright a light source is. The only difference is that opacity doesn't go beyond 100, whereas intensity can go way beyond 100, okay? So anyway, there you go. That's the short answer is there's no reason to have a light that is absolutely black. Let me see. So here's a fun fact for you. You can keyframe the color of your light. And so you could keyframe a color, move from 0, from black, to another color over time. And that could be a lighting effect that you want to create. So that could be probably the most compelling argument for why you would have black as your light color, is because you can change it over time to a color that you do want. And that is just another way to animate it. Is it the right way to animate it? I don't know, because intensity would be normally how you would treat the light brightness. But there you have it. Okay. Good question, though. That was one of those that I'm like, I don't know the answer to this. I guess I will have to find out. So yeah, good one.
But with intensity, you couldn't change the color of the light.
No, with intensity, it's just the color stays the same. So if you're shifting the color, if you're doing like disco lighting, or you know you're putting a rave on your After Effects, you can, yeah, then that's definitely, color being keyframeable is a good thing. Is there any time or situation where if you had enough pre-production, you would opt to use After Effects instead of getting your effect on set or in camera? Not that I've thought of. Generally speaking, if you want it to look real, if you want your effect to look real and you can do it in camera, you should do it in camera. And I say that as the guy that teaches you how to use After Effects. Because invariably, if you can shoot it and make it, if you can shoot it in camera, it will be more convincing to your audience. Now you have to get it, you have to execute it so that it's captured in camera. And that can sometimes be costly or difficult or dangerous. Are you going to, you're going to opt to use After Effects to put fire into a scene? Yes. Are you going to try and capture fire in camera? Depends on the fire. If you're burning down a house, no. If it's a campfire, sure. Could you augment the campfire with After Effects fire? Yes. So all of those things are valid answers to the question of is After Effects, would it be appropriate to use After Effects instead of getting it in camera? But it's, you know, it depends on what you're trying to do. So I think that if it's not the question of whether you have enough pre-production, but it's whether you have enough budget. What's a good example of what 3D animation should look like? I don't know. Anything that's pleasing to the eye? I don't know. I honestly, this is a fantastic. This is like, what color? What's your favorite color? So there are plenty of good examples of 3D animation. We'll actually get to one that I liked in my talk today, and that can serve as my example of what I think a good 3D animation looks like. But any 3D animation that is either pleasing or unobtrusive, it doesn't interfere with what's happening in terms of what's being said or done. It kind of flows with the story. That is a good version. That's a good 3D animation. Okay. So anyone if you are sitting in a movie theater watching something and you're thinking to yourself, wow, that's a great 3D animation, it's probably not that great. Or your story sucks because you're thinking about the 3D animation. And I get that when you get to become a digital filmmaker and you go through this program, the way you view media is forever changed. I know it had changed for me when I went through a filmmaking program. I quit watching movies just to watch them and enjoy them. I started watching movies and going, I'm not following this. This is not making sense. I'm out of the film. I'm starting to pick apart why the lighting doesn't look good. I'm starting to criticize. I'm starting to think critically about what I'm seeing instead of just enjoying it. The most amazing feeling these days is when I go watch a movie and I'm able to enjoy it enough that I don't automatically start picking it apart. That's a nice feeling because now you know the story's good enough and that it's, it sounds great, looks good, and the story is engaging. My brain is actually able to not be totally fixated on what am I looking at? What are the camera angles? Where are the lights? Is the light motivated correctly? Are they doing their cuts correctly? How's the pacing? All of that other stuff, because that's where my head goes when I'm watching something boring. Okay.
Question?
Yes.
Is the special effects that they had in Inception, is that a good, where they're folding over like the scenes?
Yeah, that served the story. That's the main reason why that worked really well. Another one was Doctor Strange, where they were running through weird landscapes that were curling and twisting and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. It served the story. 4D? Well, it's all 3D. It's all, yeah, that's all CGI stuff. I mean, and it's, I'm not sure what 4D would look like in that respect. But I mean, it's novel. Yeah. So
didn't they use special sets though for Inception?
For some of it, but a lot of it was done with, and I don't think they did that much that was in camera. It's been a while since I've watched the BTS on that, so I don't know. But if I had to guess, a lot of it was, if it was done with aerial photography, it was done and composited together very cleverly.
I thought I saw something where they had like a special tube so that the cameras could move around when they were doing some of the floating scenes where he wraps everybody up and pushes them.
Yeah, well, that one is yes. Short answer is that one was tricky. Yeah, I was thinking more like the cityscape scenes, like the outdoor stuff, where you saw like things when it was 0G, or it was like we're all running on sides of walls and things are, and then gravity shifts suddenly. That's a different animal, probably also significantly influenced by computers, but they did more practicals there. Does 3D animation work fluidly between After Effects and Premiere? Not really. 3D animation is pretty much solely the domain of After Effects. Premiere doesn't have a notion of a 3D rendering engine. So you would be in danger if you thought that you could. Now, when you talk about working fluidly between After Effects and Premiere, I'm not sure exactly what that might mean. So there might be a nuance to this question. But my off-the-cuff answer is that when you are doing animation in 3D, you've left Premiere completely behind now because it just cannot. It's not built for that. Doesn't comprehend what you're doing, and so it becomes a big problem. It also understand that when you deal with position information inside of After Effects, that doesn't necessarily correspond. It doesn't necessarily correspond to the coordinate system inside of Premiere. They are not coordinated that way, meaning that if you move something in Premiere and you composite it and you have underneath it or above or beneath it something from After Effects that you move inside of After Effects, there's no guarantee that those positions are going to coordinate in any way, because by the time footage gets into from Premiere from After Effects, it has been rendered flat to a video. So it's just frames of video as far as Premiere is concerned. There's no knowledge of coordinate systems or where the origin, where the anchor point, or any of this other stuff. It has no relationship at all. Okay, there's no linkage in that respect. Would you use After Effects lights to lighten the video in a scene? Probably not, unless it was where the best case would be that you were running a video, you were superimposing video on something, and then you were lighting it so that it looked like it was in the scene. That would be appropriate by using 3D lights to do that. As opposed to having it be something that looks flat or looks, independently illuminated, separate from the scene in the live action scene in which it was, or even a computer generated scene in which you were trying to composite it into. So you would use lights to make the video look like it fit in, to make a video that was on screen look like it fit the environment that it's being composited into. I know I'm not saying that super good, but if you unpack that very carefully, parse that really carefully, what I'm trying to get to is that lighting in After Effects is there to try and make you believe that something is real or has depth or fits into a scene by lighting it in a way that's similar to the lighting of the scene itself. This really comes into play when you take a live action scene, you camera track it, and then you place shapes or solids or objects into that camera tracked coordinate system, and then you want it to look like the same lighting of the room or the outdoors that it is placed, and then you have to create lighting to do that. So you would use them to lighten the video, assuming that it was, but if it was that the video itself was dark and you, instead of using color correction, you wanted to use an AE light, no, that would not be helpful to you, because the video layer in After Effects is going to act like a surface, and the light is going to hit the surface. It's not actually going to brighten the video. It's going to bounce off the video and reflect back and scatter some of that light. So it would have the effect, depending on the material options you set on that layer, it would make it look lower contrast probably, but it wouldn't look, it wouldn't change materially what the video is showing you, I guess. Yeah, all right. What is the function of split layer? Well, that's kind of like asking me what a null object is, but all right. So a split layer is when you come in here and you say you wanted, there's a couple ways that it matters. And sometimes it makes sense to do it and sometimes it doesn't, but it's a workflow choice. You can come over here to edit, and on any layer that's selected, you can come over here and, or Shift Control D or Shift Command D, you can split that layer. And what that does is it actually creates a duplicate layer and sets the in and out of those layers so that they don't overlap. So that's the shortcut. I mean, you could duplicate a layer, set the in and out points to be the same, or to begin and end at this point, right at where the playhead is. But there's a convenient choice where you can split the layer. Now, why would you do that? That depends. Sometimes it's where you want to change the behavior of an object. If you have an object that is driven by an expression, especially, and you want to change the parameters of that expression, you might use a split layer to do that, because changing an expression of a single layer is not something easy or recommended. If it was just regular keyframe animations, you could change this with a hold keyframe instead of splitting it. But you know, there's a variety of reasons. It's a workflow choice. It's not necessarily the only way to skin a cat, but it is. It's a convenience of duplicating a layer, setting the in and out points so that they don't overlap, and that they meet at this at where the playhead is, and then you're done, and then you move forward. So yeah, I mean, split layers. It's helpful, again, for the, you know, depending on what you're trying to do. If it's that you need to jump position from one point to another, you certainly could use a split layer to do that. You could also use a hold keyframe where before the hold keyframe, your position is one value, and then after the hold keyframe, your position is where the new location is. So it's, you know, depends on what parameters you're changing. Okay. Is it essential to know a lot of math to understand and use After Effects properly? I don't think so. I think that it is useful to know some math. You need to know enough to know where the size of your video frame. So if you know that you're dealing with a 1080p image that is 1920 by 1080, you should quickly be able to tell me where the middle of that frame is. Should be 960 by 540, because that's kind of the coordinate system. So if you can quickly do a little bit of well-determined division in your head, you're probably fine. But if you needed to really take advantage of expressions, yeah, you'll probably need a little more math, especially if you're going to do complex motion that is driven by you know, actual math equations. But again, you don't need to understand math in order to use After Effects. And to do very complicated things in After Effects, you don't need to use math particularly. You can do a great deal of it visually. That's my opinion. Is there a lot of demand for people who specialize in motion graphics? That's a fantastic question. I don't know that it's very common now. It was, you know, so let's put it this way. There are a lot of people that can do motion graphics. There are a few people that can do really amazing things with motion graphics. And the difference usually is how much time and effort and experimentation has each person put into this process. How far down the rabbit hole have they gone? And so if you've spent a good amount of time doing this, I don't want you to feel like, you know, is there a job market for me? Yes, there is. Is there a job market in Sonoma County? You might have to look further south, like San Francisco. Yeah, to laugh it up, Naomi. You know, I think that you know, for shrewd and clever producers, there's always work to be had. It's just you have to be shrewd and clever, and you need to always be reinventing. You always be creating new content and showing it to people, and building new ideas and experimenting with things. And then you build a show reel that you can hand around. That is invaluable for motion graphics. It's like a calling card. You just leave somebody a URL to a YouTube or Vimeo video that in 30 seconds blows their minds as to what you can do with After Effects. You'll get work. This was an interesting one. It seems that green screen or Ultra Key can remove a color and replace a background, but can you do something similar with an object on a person? This is the invariable Sin City question that comes in. Yes, you can. And there's a variety of ways to do it. And actually, this hints at something we're going to get to in a few weeks, because we will talk about chroma key and we will talk about rotoscoping. And both of those techniques are capable of doing what you're asking here. This is the reason I put it up on the screen is because it's a good enough question. It's an interesting one. It's like, you know, yes, you can use Ultra Key or any of the keying effects in After Effects to create a matte that isolates an object, and then use that to either change its color, remove its color, make everything else have no color except for that object, etc. So all of that can be done. So the answer, of course, is the rabbit hole has no bottom. All right. I'm very sorry for how long that went, but let's go through. The good news is that the content I'm going to go through will get us to the break. And then when we get back, we'll go through a walkthrough, and then you'll have the time to go through the in-class exercise. So let's recap real quick. 3D coordinates in After Effects. Realistically, the thing that you want to consider here is how does 3D coordinates or 3D layers affect compositing? Okay. And that goes back to, if a 2D layer and a 3D layer are interacting, how do they interact? If a 3D layer, if two 3D layers have the same Z value, how do they interact? And so on, so that they and how they're placed inside of the composition can inform some of those, some of that. When you talk about lights, what are the rules to follow for shadows to work correctly? Is probably the most important thing to think about when you're dealing with lights. Is when you first start to use, and also, is it black? What's the color of the light? But more so, that's less vital than this one, because this is what people run into all the time. Is like, I put lights in and I can't see any shadows. Why is that? There's there's 3 settings that need to be checked. There's the light needs to have shadows turned on. It needs to be able to cast shadows. Not every light can cast shadows, but of the lights that can, that is a setting that can be turned off. So check that. Second is the object that's in the foreground, that the light is in front, that's between the light and the thing that the shadow is being thrown on, needs to cast shadows as well. So you have 2 things now that you have to make sure that cast shadows is turned on. And then finally, on the layer to which the shadow will land, that needs to have accept shadows turned on. So now there's 3 things that can, any one of them turned off will basically no shadows. So that's what's frustrating, is that you have to go check 3 things to make sure that shadows will actually work correctly when you place lights. Are there reasons why you don't want to have shadows show in a light scene? Short answer is yes. The longer answer is it's interesting. So for instance, let's talk a little bit about some options here. For this part, I'm going to turn on transparency because this helps to a certain degree. So when the background is black, it makes shadows a little harder to comprehend. So if I were to pull this back a little bit and maybe brighten it some more, so that, of course, now I have 2 spots. So we'll just increase the brightness back to where it was before. Okay. So here you've got a foreground element, a background element, nice shadow. And again, shadows turned on for the light. So under light options, you see cast shadows is turned on. It is not keyframeable. Okay, so cast shadows turned on. For the foreground element, which is up here, cast shadows is also turned on. And for the last one, under material options, accept shadows is turned on. If you turn that off, there's no shadow. Or actually, it says accept shadows only, and that's what I was going to show you next, is that you can actually create, so here's where shadows are turned off. There's no shadow cast from this to that. Then the last setting on here is kind of interesting, is that it says only. And if you notice, the shadow is actually there. The background layer is rendered as not as transparent, but just as a it's really just showing you the shadow that's being cast as an individual thing. Now, if we can move this out of the, well, no, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this instead. Here we go. Move this out of the way a little bit more. Maybe move it way out here in front. Size it down a little bit so that we're able to see. Mostly what I want to get to is that you can have a shadow that just shows up on this to where it is. You find out why the shadow is not as bright as I'm looking for it to be. Shadow darkness, diffusion, that's fine, great, perfect, wonderful. Specular intensity, yep, okay, great. All right. This can be used to basically have shadows from objects in, you'd use this if you wanted a shadow to fall on a natural surface in a video. Say you had something floating above the ground, and you wanted that object to cast a shadow from the sun onto the ground, you would actually create not a spotlight like this, but a parallel. So if we change this to a parallel, why not, just for fun? What would happen is that you'd have this object would render, this would be there, and then you'd also have this this background element that is just the shadow would be also composited. So the way you would composite that onto the back or onto footage would be that you would oh God, where am I going with this one? I start to show you something and then I'm like, wait, what? Is the and I don't have any footage to put in here, so that's why I'm like, well, where am I going to show you with this one? If you had some video or a still image that you could put behind it, you could composite this such that the shadow by itself will be there. This solid won't actually show up. And in fact, maybe it's that what I will try is see if this. No. All right. Forget it. I wanted to show you something, and then I get you to the point where I'm like 3/4 of the way there, but I got to move on. So the idea of casting shadows is not trivial, but is something that you have to be aware of, that there are many settings for, including this one where, you can basically have it just be a proxy for being able to render a shadow transparently on top of something else. Yeah. All right.
I think I remember
Yes.
one of the Linda videos also saying that if you have a lot of lights animated in one scene, that it might be good for some of them to not be able to cast shadows, so it's not as busy. But that might be a reason to not cast shadows.
Yeah, that would be a reason to not have the lights cast shadows.
Right.
And it depends on the nature of it. It's if you are casting shadows, you should have a reasonably good reason to do so. Again, it's only if you want it to seem more natural. But if you're going to use other things, like, let's put it this way: if you were to throw a diffuser or put a light inside of a softbox and you tried to move it around a scene, the quality of shadows would be different than if it had nothing on it. It was a bare, fixture that's moving around the scene. That's going to cast much different shadows than something with a softbox where it diffuses a lot more light. So that's another thing to take into consideration, the quality of the light that you put into the space. Let's move on. So when you talk about cameras inside of 3D composites, you want to, or 3D compositions, you want to think about specifically in this one, the role of focal length actually has to play is you can change the lens focal length from the default of 50 millimeters, and then that will change the behavior of the camera to match. So if you know when you shot something that you use a certain focal length, you can actually duplicate that camera inside of After Effects to do the compositing so that it tracks correctly. And then finally, null objects in parenting. Things to think about here is parenting layers versus pre-composing as a grouping strategy. So when you parent something, when you parent layers of one to another, you group them together in terms of how they behave with one another. When you pre-compose layers, you also group them together to behave a certain way. So why would you choose one way over the other? There's a variety of arguments either way, but just these are kind of the major thinking points when you're talking about each of these notions that you want to keep in mind as we move into this. All right, so now your new content for the night. When you want to take something that's a flat photograph and you want to make it seem like it has depth, the technique that we run into is you really don't have too many choices. You can either do a basic Ken Burns sort of move. Does anybody know what a Ken Burns move is? Okay, so yeah. So for those of you who don't know, Ken Burns, documentary filmmaker, PBS, just about every, the Civil War, the Vietnam War, any war, hello. He's done lots of documentaries that use, especially with the Civil Wars, where this was really kind of came out a lot, is he would take still images and he would just either zoom out very slowly from a very tight shot on a photo or still, and he'd zoom out to give context, or he'd move the camera across an image. So it was this, this notion of you could move a camera across a still image and it would make it more visually interesting, and it did for a long time. That technique is very, very trivial to do in Premiere and After Effects, so I'm not going to show you that one. But if you ever wanted to make a still image feel like it had some depth, there's really not that many options that you have. You have to, in order to create depth, you have to have foreground and background elements, right? And so in order to have that work, you need to have those, you need to have some kind of reference that lets you see the relationship between foreground and background, so that as they move separately, your brain says, ooh, that's in front of the other thing. There's depth. This is how 3D movies work for you in terms of how they split the image into left and right, blah, 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 your stereoscopic vision. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about 3D vision for theatrical reasons. We're talking about something on a flat screen that looks like it has depth. So the basic technique uses animated 3D cameras in After Effects to create a parallax. That's where you see foreground and background elements moving at different speeds or different rates, tricking your eye and your mind into believing that something's in front of the other. When you use it judiciously with archival photos and static images, it can definitely bring visual interest. It can be way, way overdone as well and become a headache-inducing capability. So, again, I like to use the phrase less is more. This is definitely another of those situations where you want to be judicious with your use of it. Don't overdo it, or it will be crazy. And the technique is generally called 2.5D. Here's an example. This is so when somebody said hey, what's a good 3D animation? This is a pretty interesting one. This is for booze. So listen up. And it's in another, actually, I turned the volume off, or the sound off, because it's in Russian. So yeah. So anyway, here goes, and we'll just play it through, and then we'll play it again, and I'll pause it at certain points to kind of. No subtitles because it's an ad. It's basically an ad. Okay, so watch this. Okay. So, yeah, I know. I'm like, wow, this is a booze ad. At the end of it, you're, whoa, this is for vodka. Right on. Okay, so let's play that again, and I'll stop at a certain point. So as you see the first scene, you see that there's elements in the foreground. There's elements in the middle. So you've got the foreground elements, you've got a middle ground, you've got background elements, and they're all moving independently of each other. The cameras, this quote unquote camera is moving through the space. Okay. And then suddenly everything's in focus. The focus shifts from the foreground to the background. So the focus was on this guy in front, and then it kind of quickly shifts to the guys in the back so that you can see more of what's going on. And then suddenly the camera zips and makes a transition. Okay. And transitions to this image, which again is very, so it's a quick transition to another scene. But again, the camera moves slowly. The camera doesn't move aggressively while you're trying to take in what's happening in the scene. But you have a background, you have a few, I think these two move together, these two move together, and then there's this guy and another guy that you'll see in a moment as it transitions to the next look. And then it goes out through the window. Now you have a really interesting background because the background of clouds is moving fast. And so that's really dynamic for an otherwise completely static scene. And now you see it kind of zoom. It does a lot of these kind of snap zooms in. It's going to zoom in over here, and then it's going to fade to black really quick because there's no good transition for where, I suppose it goes through a dark window, and then you find this family seated inside this palace. Yeah. It's the Russian Tsar, the last Tsar and his family. But and this is relatively that did have some depth to it. They were split out, but it was the camera moved in and then it zooms out into the frame and then it tilts out to this one, the final shot, which again is a still image. This is not video. This is a still image that's just moved across on the screen. And they've done some work with making the background kind of refract through the bottle. Okay, this is all done with this technique that we're going to show you.
They set up the objects in the 3D space and move the camera.
Yes.
Or the camera and move the object.
Best case scenario is that you'll move the camera because the objects in general, unless the objects need to be moving, and that's a different technique. But if you want to do a parallax effect and do it by animating the layers, that will lead you down the road of misery and headaches. So I'm going to show you the technique that basically illustrates exactly what we're talking about here. So here's how this sort of thing looks like inside of After Effects. Here's a picture of Cate Blanchett. What it is actually I took a still image that was like a promo from Blue Eyes or something like that. And I literally cut Kate's outline out as a foreground element. And that's what you see here on the left-hand side. Then I also cut her chair out of that photo and set it as a middle, it's set back just a little bit from her. And then the background, as you can see, it still has some of Cate Blanchett in the background, but it's so far out of the frame that you'll never see it, and blurred it and zoomed it up so that now you can animate this. Okay. You're not going to play with this one today. This was one that I did a different animation technique on, but it still had this basic, way of, and so you also see that there's the camera. The camera is what moves, and all of these layers basically stay put. Okay. So the technique in very short order is you start with a still image, usually with a reasonably easy to mask foreground. You chop it up in Photoshop. You'll isolate foreground from the background, and perhaps maybe you'll find some intermediate layers. You repair the background to remove the foreground, which is usually like clone, the clone stamp, or the repair tools in Photoshop. Or you'll find a suitable replacement background that will work, that is clear. It's what they call a clean plate. You'll arrange these layers into an After Effects comp and make the layers 3D. You'll add a camera layer and a null object as its parent so that you can control and animate it. You'll animate the camera and profit. Okay, that is how this technique works, and that's what you guys are going to be doing when we get back from our break. So yep. So this is a great time to take a few minutes, get up, stretch your legs, get a drink of water, because I know that's what I'm going to do. And then we'll come back and we'll get started trying it out. Okay?
Do you mind going back to that previous?
You bet.
Thanks so much.
And I am putting these lectures up on Canvas, so they will be on Canvas. It's just not on Canvas tonight.
Is that last comment an homage to South Park?
Yes. The Underpants Gnomes made their appearance tonight. It's, of course, I actually had all the steps there with the Underpants Gnomes. Didn't know what to do. It was like skill underpants,
profit.
Profit. Yeah, exactly. So it all makes sense. Ugh. Eat an orange. Dang it.
Little cuties are the best.
Oh my God.
We just need to add like a graphic of, is it Butters? Who sees the Underpants Gnomes?
Look out on there. Oh, no, it was the tweet.
It
Yeah.
was Tweak. Yeah.
That's right.
Tweak and the Underpants.
They're there.
Oh my God, do you see it?
It's pretty good.
That's a classic.
Oh.
He's a little wannabe rich on farm, bro. Like for real, like it's just gets better times.
Oh, look, it's still working.
I was feeling like some tough. One of them is gonna blow up. This guy's definitely gonna blow up. This guy though has a weird face, and I don't know if I'm gonna see it. Looks like a little parrot right there. I feel like he's definitely gonna. Except that guy, he has a little like weird nose.
Yes, question on casting shadows.
Yep.
I can't figure out how to get the graphic to actually cast a shadow.
Okay. So let's look at what we got. This is the last thing I did this one. All right. So let's first start with shadows is on. Shadows is off. Shadows is try to turn everything on as much as possible. So grid comp is that should accept shadows. This is so this should cast shadows for sure. The other thing to understand is if you take these two items right here, this what are their z coordinates? The z coordinates are the same, and so there's no possibility of shadow because they're around. So if you move this out front by hitting a negative. Oh, I see. I'm moving it together. Haha, that was funny. As soon as you do that, you see the show. Okay. Thanks. Yep. That's my order of troubleshooting, by the way, Peter. Just so that you know, it's like if I ever run into that, that's exactly the sort of thing I ask. Hey, Alex, do you want to ask your infuriating question now?
Yes, please.
All right. I got a couple minutes. And I got to get back to the
Right, that's the issue. So I shot this live show at NEO's this Saturday. And there was this female who put down some vocals. And I wanted to sync up the song. And then sync up and I was like, oh, it might be different versions. And this one songs that was
What the hell, why did you get that? Because I did all of it. I'm like, what's up? Shoot.
yeah, and that's entirely.
The only saving grace is the last.
So what you could do is have a recording of it. Try to a lot of here's the way you do work is live. I mean, it's whole, yeah, exactly. So it's like you have to work to try and match the pitch changes. I'm not kidding, dude. That's a hard one. That's not trivial. So yeah, it would be infuriating because you're basically trying to duplicate a live performance of stories with dragging your hand and whatever, creating mood. And that is a lot. That's what makes DJ. That's what makes DJ. If they can do that, and it's like legit thing. For example, yeah. I wish I had a better answer for you.
So basically, I tried doing that for the longest time.
Like how long ago?
Like an hour.
Ah, an hour is nothing. Spend a day and a half, and then tell me that you spent a long time. That I would believe. But yeah, an hour. I mean, how long is this? 3-4 minutes. Probably have to listen to it a lot. If you brought the two songs, the recording that you got, the live recording, and then the original track, to Audacity or to Audition, look at the waveforms, you probably could find sections where you see the waveform move, stretching or being compressed. You could try it. Original. That is literally what I would try. I have no idea if it'll actually work. Okay. Okay. Well, that's I mean, no guarantee it'll work because the changes with random. Instantaneous. That's our which Audition would do. What Audition would do would be those instantaneous changes. Yeah. Should be able to do that in process. You should be able to change this.
I was hoping to hear all.
No, man, there's no one button make it sound awesome. Sorry, I know. I wished for that. If I could find that button, I would not need to be teaching here. That is the honest truth. All right, so is everybody? Actually, most of the class is not here. Checked out on me. Did they check out on me? That's fine. I don't care. They paid their monies. I get paid whether or not you're here. I could teach to an empty room and it would still work. All right, so let's get back to the point of the evening, which is to try this. So for tonight's class, this is a slide I'll leave up once we get started, but I'm gonna go through this. This is the expectation of what I'm gonna want you to do. This is not what we're gonna start with, though. We're gonna start with another project that's in the week 10 folder, and then we'll move, and this will be the part that you guys can work on. So using the Jeep on the Hill project, you're gonna set each layer as a 3D layer. You're gonna position and scale those layers appropriately, or especially the background layer is gonna be flung way into the back of the Z with the Z layer coordinate. You're going to position and scale the middle layer, and then apply any layer flex for blurring if you want to do that instead of using the depth of field capabilities inside of the 3D camera, which is advanced. You can create a camera layer, possibly consider focal length change there. Create a null object, set it to 3D, and parent the camera to it. You're going to tweak the layer positions. Once you put the camera into the scene, if you change the focal length, you'll probably need to move layers around. And then you animate the null object to create a pleasing 2.5D animation. All right, so what does that look like? Let's go over here. So actually, what I was going to start with before we dove in is talking about creating one of these images. And so I've opened Photoshop, and I'm going to open one of the files. So if you come over here inside of Photoshop, you can go into the week 10 folder. For this one, let's do Jeremy Renner. I mean, you can do the Jeep on the Hill, but Jeremy Renner is what I'm going to go through in this demo here. I'm going to open this up and show you what we've got. So when you talk about how these images are created, this is the original image that we were left with. Let me turn the lights on again. All right. So this is the original image that we start with, which is a press photo of Jeremy Renner looking over his shoulders in a very dashing manner towards the loving and adoring media as he walks the red carpet for a premiere of a movie that he was in. Some issues that, well, what we want to do is we want to take Jeremy and we want to remove him from the background, or we want to remove him from the image, and then we want to kind of make him seem like he's like we're in the scene with him, and we're moving, our camera's moving separately from his, okay? So when we do that, we end up with a project that looks a little something like, I'm going to not save that. I'm going to go over here, Jeremy Renner. So if you guys want to follow along, you can open up the jeremyrenner.aep, and it will bring in a Jeremy Renner 2, which is the sequence that's up here. And you'll see that the animation is that the camera moves across, and then we've got a little, oh, that's all it does. Oh, okay, got it. So Jeremy Renner basic. If we do the first one, this is actually a little more complicated in that I've actually added a lot more to this, but I'm not going to show you all of this week. But notice that his head turns, there's a light, there's a flash from the photographer, and it's, you know, so you're like, oh, cool, right on. So it's a 5-second animation, really, that shows when you play it and you preview it, this is what you see. You see Jeremy Renner going, yeah, check me out. But you'll notice that his head kind of, there's a slight tilt to his head over time, which is not something that's built into what we're doing tonight. So what we're doing tonight is something a little more straightforward, where he's a flat object. The background's flat objects, and when you move it through, this is what you see is like the foreground is moving separately from the background. Okay, so what does that look like in terms of how you create the photo? So this is the original photo we started with, and you'll notice that the first order of business is we need to mask out our foreground. So that was just literally taking the background, copying it into a new layer, and then masking it, and then applying the mask to that image. Notice that I didn't do a perfect job I left. There's little areas that were, I was in a hurry, I guess, when I was screwing around with this this one. And the edge around him is really is obviously soft. It's softer than it should be. When you talk about the background, what's he standing behind? He's standing behind a poster of this movie that's stuck up on the wall. Well, the trouble is that if we're going to animate him separately from it, we probably want to have that image. So I went out and I got an image from from the internet and pasted it on here, and then actually did some masking to it to reveal parts or to hide parts of it that were otherwise visible. And then once I resized it, reshaped it so that it fits back on a background. And what the background looks like is, you'll notice that I took out the cordon and the stanchions that are in the photo, because that was just kind of like, that's just noise that I don't need. And then you'll notice that Jeremy Renner is actually still in the image, the background image, but that most of this is going to be knocked out anyway, because we're going to overlay a poster. And so I've just kind of dirtied the poster up a little bit down here so that it fits, but it overlays pretty well with the original. If I just A and B it, you'll see that it's pretty close enough that it'll pass muster as far as for what we're doing here. And then all I have to do is just put Jeremy on top. And now I've got my 3 layers. I've got a foreground, but I treat these two as actually the same. I treat them as one background layer. So really, we've got a foreground and a background. So that's kind of creating this in After Effects, or sorry, in Photoshop. It's important to note that you can do this in After Effects. You can knock out a foreground element in using After Effects, using masks. But the trouble that you'll run into invariably is how to recreate the background, because you don't have a clone stamp. Well, I mean, it's not as effective in After Effects. You do kind of have a clone stamp tool up here. You can inside of After Effects treat this like it was you're recreating pixels. So you can do it inside of After Effects by itself. But I just imported that PSD as individual layers, and then they get composited onto this that gets composited onto this this composition as a stack. So you have the background, the original background, which is hidden by everything. You have the and is actually not normally would not be visible. You have Jeremy, who's this layer. You've got the Captain America poster, and you have the red carpet scene itself. So generally speaking, these two elements kind of go hand in hand with each other. We want to animate them the same. So what I did was I actually parented the red carpet scene to or parented the red carpet scene to the Captain America poster, so that any place that the Captain America poster is, the background scene will follow. So, and how does that look? When you look at if you look at the position elements of both of these, you'll see that the poster and the scene actually are different Z coordinates. That's curious. So we moved that one way in the background of this. No, this either. Oh, that's right. I've got them both selected. Pardon me. So if I move this, I'm actually moving both of them together. Whatever. It's fine. So the idea is that since Captain America is the child, sorry, this is the parent. The parent is the red carpet scene. The Z coordinate of the poster is actually relative to the background. So if we move this background back and we set this to this value, even if we move it forward, that value doesn't change. So it's like you basically want to think of it in terms of when you parent these two together, the child layer, which is the one that references the parent, these values are relative to the anchor point of the parent layer. Pro tip. That's all I was going for there. Okay. Now, animating over time. So the other part of this that you can take a look at if we switch to 2 views is, and conveniently this one's a top view, is you see that we've got a camera with a really long lens on this thing. What's the camera? The zoom is 1500 millimeters. That's an enormous long lens. I don't know why I chose to do it that way, but I did. And the camera is actually, the camera itself, the layer is parented to this null object, which happens to be situated at the same location as Jeremy Renner is. Oh no, actually isn't. It's even further off. It's closer to the background than Jeremy Renner. This is going to be fun. This is going to be interesting. Is watch what happens here when you move it across, when you scrub across the time, is you see that the camera is actually moving inward subtly to where its start and end points are kind of very curious. Let's find the position markings on this. So you'll notice that it actually animated X and Z separately, separate keyframes for each of those, so that if you were to see them in the speed graph, you could actually manipulate the dolly in separate from the slide to the left, so that if you wanted it to be a faster dolly in, you could move the Z position, which is the blue keyframe. You move this one in by itself, and then suddenly your Z position is now, or your dolly in is much faster, and then it kind of stops, and while still moving to the side. So the animation is a little more, I don't know, you have a little more control over that. So again, you have, looking from the top down, you have your background. Actually, no, that's the invisible background. You have the red carpet scene, which is all the way in the back. You have the Captain America poster, which is all the way in the back. You have Jeremy Renner, who's in the front. And then you have the camera, which is right here seeing the whole thing. So this is the conceit. This is basically everything you need to know about how to set this. Is your foreground is basically going to be left at 0, the position of 0. That's why the 0 position, foreground we leave it at 0Z. And then your background gets pushed way into the back with a large Z number here. And then if you have any mid-ground elements or intermediate layers that are kind of stacked to enhance more of a parallax, you'd move them in this top-down order to make sense of it. Okay. So now your turn again. Let's open the other project. I'm not going to save this. We go over to Jeep on the Hill and open that After Effects project, which is Jeep on the Hill 2.5D. I've been showing this particular demo for a long time. This is an empty composition. Welcome. Okay, congratulations. What I've given you is you have 3 layers. You have 3 Photoshop layers, and they are at least given, they're given to you in some semblance of, they're named appropriately. Let's put it that way. So if you want, you can just drag something down. You'll see that, again, the background has some of the foreground element in it, so that's going to limit what you can do in terms of where you can place it. If you wanted to go out onto the internet and find a clean plate of an Arctic background, or I've seen other students would put a video of time-lapse clouds rolling through, like storm clouds rolling through across the sky. You could superimpose that as your background layer, and then it's going to make the scene more intense and more visually interesting. You have a middle ground layer, which is actually, because they're all composited right now in 2D, you can't see this, but if you move this in front, you'll see that it's just this side of the hill over here, which is really meant to be on the right-hand side. And then finally, you have the foreground, which will lay on top here, and that's actually the Jeep and the hillside that the Jeep is sitting on. So when you see them all collapsed on top of each other like this, you're like, what the hell did you get me signed up for, Randy? And the short answer is you drop them in this order: foreground, middle ground, background, and then you want to set all of them to be 3D layers. So you come over to the 3D layer button for those layers. If you don't see them, make sure that you have toggle switches and modes set to show the buttons. And then you'll set them to make sure that they're all 3D layers. And now you actually can start to set the scene. All right. So remember what I showed you. What I showed you here is that you set each layer as a 3D layer. That's what we've just done. You want to position and scale. Sorry. Here we go. You want to position and scale each of these to be appropriate. So this is where having two views and having the active camera view, which is the default camera right now, and seeing that all of your layers, all three of your layers are sitting on top of one another, okay? So you want to take the background layer, you want to move it way into the background. So you can take the position, tap P on your keyboard to open the position attribute, click on the Z and set to something like 10,000. And it disappears. You're like, what happened? So the other part of this is that as you do this, so that you can see, it's now way back here, and it's much smaller. You can see the outline of it in the comp or in the active camera view. It's not showing very large. So the next thing you want to do is you want to scale this up. So if you select the layer and press S, and you can scale this as big as you like. So maybe 375, maybe 350, maybe 400, whatever your pleasure is. You find the number that's right for you, and there you go. Now you've got your background layer is set. Notice that it's much larger now. That's a good thing. Okay, next is you want to do your middle ground. You want to do your middle layer, which is this hillside. You want this to be off to the side, off to the right-hand side. So again, you'll hit P. You'll set this back a ways, probably not as far as 10,000, maybe 4,000 or 2,000 or 2,500 or something like that. But you're also going to want to move it. So we'll come over here to this part. We'll zoom in. Let's go 25% so that we can find it on our screen. Where are you? Oh, there we are. Okay, so here's our background, our middle ground. We want to drag it over to where we want it. So drag it over to the right-hand side, and then you want to scale that as well. Click and scale. Scale it up. Maybe not as big as the last one. Maybe this is only 250. You might choose to move it down a little bit so it's not quite so prominent there in the screen. And then finally, you've got your Jeep on the hill, which is kind of out of frame at the moment. So maybe you can position it down a little bit and over to the side so that it's a little more. So it's a hero shot for a product. So you definitely want to make sure that the product is showing. But if you wanted to check and see what your limitations were, you can see that the image runs out on this end over there. So maximum, you'd probably be able to center this in the image right now. Or, I mean, obviously it could go way off, but then you start to run into where the background is showing. So this is probably the extent, but again, because of the product is off the screen, that's probably not a great choice. So bring it so that at least all of the Jeep is showing. Okay, so now you've got your three layers more or less where you need them to be for this to start. Okay, so whoops, pardon me. I'm gonna come over here, zoom this out. Nope, that's not zooming out, that's zooming in. Okay. So you've got your foreground, you got a middle layer, which is this hillside, and then you have the background, which is this way far off, impossibly far away sort of layer that you you don't want to see much movement on. So what's the next prescription? We position and scale the background, the middle ground, and any layer effects. So if you wanted to, you could. These are already kind of blurred. I may have put some effects on these layers. Let's see. No, maybe I didn't. Nope, there's no effects on the layers. So if you wanted to, you could blur out the background. Really, you could just take go over to the effects, type blur, add something like a camera lens blur. Gaussian blur is always a good standby that people like to use, and then you can blur it out considerably. So I mean, and you can be pretty aggressive with that by the time it goes all the way in. Well, hello. Hi there, big fella. What do you?
Is the green that's showing there problem? Or was it actually green on the Jeep?
What?
That little speck of green. Is that a positive problem?
Entirely possible. Which speck of green are you talking about?
Yeah, see on the door? That little green again?
What, this?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the 3D layer anchor point.
Oh,
So yeah, this is actually drawn on there by After Effects. If you deselect the layer, that goes away. So yeah, I had mistakenly zoomed in.
you lined it up exactly with the.
Yeah, it just happens to be right on the. So you can come in here and again, you can set the blur. You can be pretty aggressive when you're dealing with the background image or the background layer, because again, it is it's way back there, so it can be way out of focus, and that's okay. And it's still going to look convincing because you can tell the person looking is going to be like, oh yeah, hey, there's the only thing that's wrong with this right now is that the Jeep has this little open sky part that's the wrong color. Whatever. Okay. So we've done this. We've if you wanted to add in a layer effect, and now we need to create a camera layer. So go to layer, new camera. Consider the option of creating a wider angle lens, since this is an outdoor scene and it probably was shot with a wider angle lens. You can choose like a 28 millimeter, maybe not more than that. A 24 might be a little too wide. And then click OK, and suddenly everything's out of whack again. You're like, Randy, what happened? And again, this is what I meant by once you set the camera focal length, now you need to go back and tweak your layers. So you might not need to tweak their position, but you probably will need to tweak their scale. So this now can't be 400. This needs to be a little bit more, like 500, 550, something like that. The middle ground, also, you're seeing the bottom of it right here. So we probably need to position it down a little bit. So we'll take the position. We can either use this three-way control here so that it's there. And maybe position the foreground a little bit more into the shot. Okay, so now we've got all of these wonderful notions put together. We're like, great. Now we animate, right? Not quite. Because the next step is we need to create a null object. Okay, so we come over here, layer, new, null object. Make sure that you set that null object to 3D so that it actually agrees in the same coordinate space. And then you want to parent the camera to it. And if you're smart, you'll hit enter while selecting null and call this camera control, so that you understand that's the purpose of that layer. Okay, so now when you get to the point where you want to animate, you can now animate the null object to do what you want to do. So if you want to also, again, remember that you can split these X, Y, and Z values into different things. So if you keyframe one of them and you need to make an adjustment to either one dimension, you can right click on position and click separate dimensions. You can also do that using the speed graph by coming over here and selecting this button right there. But again, you can hit separate dimensions, and now you've got X, Y, and Z, so that you can now animate each individually. The X value for the camera, if you start to animate the X value, you'll see that it starts to act like a side-to-side dolly. Okay? So you do need to be a little careful. There's probably some more tweaks that I can see from my perspective that I want to do. But you'll notice that the background, the foreground, the background doesn't move. The foreground, the middle ground here moves a little bit. It probably could be a little bit less. It looks like it's too. This is too close. So maybe push this back some more. Move it over some more. And scale it up some more. So come back down to this, type S, scale it up. Okay, so now again, you can come in here and start experimenting with X, Y, and Z individually so that you can see how the camera behaves. So now if you move the camera through the scene, you'll see that you are getting some parallax between the foreground, the middle ground, and the background. If you do the Y, it's a little more like a jib shot, where it's, you know, it's rising or falling into the shot. And you know what you have going on over here is fine. That's not a problem. That's a little, but this would be too much, because again, you're seeing the gap here between this layer and that. So this is what I mean by a little goes a long way, is that if you go too far, the illusion falls apart, and you don't want to do that if you can help it. So yeah, you can start here at the very beginning, keyframe any of these positions. Oh, and if you wanted to push in, you can basically do a Z move, and it's like a dolly push, a dolly in. So everything behaves like you expect it to from a camera's perspective. How a camera works, you've set a scene so that a camera behaves the way it should for that scene. All right, so now all that's left to do, all that's left is to animate this. So yeah, I leave that as an exercise. I think that is the end of, yeah, you animate the null object. Either side to side or up and down, or pan or tilt, or do anything. So you can rotate the camera, you can tilt the camera, you can Dutch the camera if that's the way you feel like, and ask questions. Show me what you got when you're done. Show me what you got. Ben, you already done? He's like, yeah. That's okay. That's a little too much with the middle ground moving opposite of the camera. Did you animate the layers?
No, but I did trim.
Oh, okay. So you're rotating the camera. So then I would suggest that it's not a natural camera movement. That this is too close to the camera. So you actually go back and just look at how you set those static layers. So click on this and zoom in. Yeah, your camera's still a lot closer to the background. What's the Z value? $7,700. So I pushed mine back 10,000, and it kind of was okay. Because you want it, basically by doing that, you lock it in place as far as the camera's concerned. Further back the background is, the less likely it is to move at all when the camera. Closer it is, that's why you start to see exaggerated movements, and it won't. And people will look at it and be like, "That looks fake."
Yeah.
I mean, so that's why.
Yeah.
And then you just scale that up so it fills the frame.
We're gonna start. B-roll pretty much. Okay.
But you're doing
I
a
know.
complicated movement, right? You're moving dolly side to side and panning. So it's a little more.
So this should go like.
Or do
You want move it a little bit over and then scale it up
What's the
again.
morning, and then what's the day?
Yes, I know. There you go. So now we're gonna look up to see.
So for very existing stuff, set early afternoon, so we'll probably be done.
What's happening. Well, that would do it. And animating the camera directly is a little fraught. It's not impossible, but it's just lead to situations like this where your point of interest and you're keyframing the point of interest and the position, and that can be maddening. So that's why you parent to a null object, and then it behaves the way you expect it to behave. I'm just keyframing one. So that's the benefit of parenting to a null object. So because yes, what I'm watching what you're doing, I'm like, oh man, I did myself something.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna turn on the buzzsaw light.
Trying to get a week on, right?
Yeah. That's
A little bit.
okay. I'll take that. That'll work. This mouse here.
Oh, yeah.
What's that? I don't need wireless mice. Trust me, I've got enough crap in my bag already. Any questions on how to do this? Everyone feel like they got an idea how to make it work? Okay, all right. You're too busy concerned with speeding up and slowing down the song. Don't envy. That's not a fun one. Challenge. That'd be a challenge to a real
Cameras.
producer.
You layer the cameras on top of everything or just any layer?
It doesn't matter. With 3D layers, it doesn't matter. The above, beyond, below, beside.
And then in the exercise, you had to make it one node instead.
And yeah, it does. Actually, in this case, since you're parenting it to a null object and animating the null object, it doesn't matter. But as Ben has learned, if you use a 2-node camera and you animate it, you have to animate both nodes of the camera, and that can be misery inducing, because you now have to concern yourself with the position of two things to successfully animate the camera, and you do not want to have to think about that.
Use the scale as the z-axis.
Okay, so could you do this kind of animation in a 2D compositor or in Premiere? I think the short answer is you could probably attempt to, but to have it all coordinate and have it look natural, have it look like the camera is moving through the space as opposed to 3 layers moving independently or kind of in coordination, that's a tougher, that's a higher standard. So it's easier to set these layers where you want them and then animate a camera than it is to animate 3 layers. I mean, you're animating one thing as opposed to animating 3 things and trying to coordinate it. It's always going to be easier to do it this way. It is a little more work in setting it up because you want to make it look plausibly like a scene would look. Where if we were shooting a still image of this room and that was the background and this was the foreground, the background doesn't need to be that far back in After Effects. But the picture that we're using, the Jeep on the hill, that background is miles away from the foreground. So you want it to be way, way back there in the 3D space and then scaled way up to accommodate for the fact that when a camera moves through that space, it's not going to look, how do I put this? It's going to look like the background's not moving as well. As far as the camera's concerned, it isn't. Because it's so far back. It's scaled up so wide. So yeah, the physics of the camera work towards. So it's more cinematic. It's going to be more convincing that way. Hopefully, anyway.
A question over video frame rates for web video. Did a video shoot last week, and when we're getting set up to shoot it, the question came up over what frame rate are we shooting? And for some reason, the number of 24p came up because they're saying that's what everybody's using on the web. I don't know where they got that.
Well,
I know to get a film look, you use 24p or 20,
to get a more to get a more cinematic film look, the frame rate matters.
But if you're just shooting a promo video, it's like 20.
Well, a promo for what?
30.
I mean, if it's a promo for a film, that's one thing. If it's a promo for, but again, it's an aesthetic. So if you're doing a film for a client and the client's like, hey, we'd like it to be shot this way, you shoot it that way. If there's no hard and fast rule that if it's going to be on the web and it's just for the web, that you shoot it at 29.97 or at 23.98. I mean, there's no requirement that you
Okay.
choose one or the other. It's like it is a style choice.
Okay.
Personally, I would shoot everything at 23.98.
Are you getting an error message?
You keep getting an error message. Let's see what this error message is. Ew. That's not good. That's really, I don't know what that is. Unbalanced, unlocked.
I just keep clicking OK, it goes away, but then it comes back again. Not always.
It's only when you go over here to this view. There's something about this view. Check, if we take that view away, it stops. But I don't know why. As soon as you cross over here, it doesn't say that. I don't know what's going on, why it's doing that. But I would suggest avoid that.
It's like, it hurts when I do this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, doctor, it hurts when I do this. Maybe you shouldn't do that. So yeah, I don't know why that is. I would actually probably consider restarting the program for that. But got some kind of complex motion going here for the mouth.
I was doing something. I put this in, it looks like it's from mine. Doing it really. Kind of went crazy, so I wanted to pull that out.
Oh, okay. So you've got a bunch of keyframes in here. You can move all of them.
Yeah, that's what I was starting to do.
So the idea so what you're doing is you're actually physically moving the camera around into that space. That's why it's being so weird. If you wanted it to zoom in, like actually zoom, that would be something that you would look at doing with. And the other part of this is that you notice that you have two values moving at the same time. Now you have three values all moving at the same time. I mean, all of your position values are moving simultaneously. It becomes a very complex motion that's very hard to
And I have this moving to the foreground.
Oh my God! Why would you? Oh, you're moving the foreground and the camera.
Well, that's what I was experimenting with the camera, and then I was like, oh, I can do this, and then I was just at that point that you
Okay.
went to me.
Yeah, and so,
Just like, what can we do with all this stuff?
well, yes, with great power comes great responsibility, Heather. For fun, I'm going to pull this off and see what. Okay, so yeah,
Yeah,
first and foremost, that motion over 2 seconds is very fast.
yeah, that's what I was
That's
noticing.
very aggressive. So yeah, you would you really, really. I mean, I would not move any of the foreground, middle ground, background. I would lock their position and not move it. Just work on moving the camera through the space to do what you're trying to do, so that it feels you get used to that approach. So that is by and large the way that it's done in terms of how you animate cameras in After Effects. Because again, as I told you, Ben discovered firsthand when you try and animate a camera, especially if it's a 2-mode camera, it becomes very, very time-consuming, and it's fraught with peril. And so we try to avoid that if possible. That's why I show you this step. So the other thing that you could do with this is you could, if you wanted to, technically scale it kind of zoom, but it still behaves like that. You see how the layers still don't move exactly coordinated, they're still moving separately from each other, so camera's parent is a 0 scale. It's not that big. Oh, Miss Mom, that's done. So, yeah.
Yeah, but at least you have a
Come over
summary.
here, MP.
So did you?
I would lose these, but again. The idea of if you needed to change the zoom or overlay, you have this. Oh no, there's no, it's literally, yeah, it says that you're 39.6, so if you needed to zoom in, this would be how you would do it. That's actually gonna behave like a camera videos in terms of zooming in, because you see the position of everything, you're just cropping into the image. So you, if you wanted to zoom in, you would use the zoom capability here as opposed to
Oh, I see.
moving the null to push it. The null is like actually moving the camera, so it's gonna be like camera motion, like a dolly or a jib or a crane or something like that, or just a tripod on a tilt camera. Whereas if you want to zoom in on something, yeah, you definitely want to be using the camera options under the camera itself and animate that. And it will look convincing. It will look like it should, like you expect it should. You can, yeah. It would be more natural looking when you do that, as opposed to it being very sudden and dramatic. Oops, hello. All right. Yes, sir. Fix it? Yeah. Yeah. And again, you know, you're like, it's not as crazy. It's like, yes, because that's what it's supposed to be. It's like, if you want it to look fantastically weird, yes, you throw out the idea of, oh, well, we can, then you can be like, well, we can move things around in the space, yes, you can. Have things fly in, or other elements that can be animated in the scene. Right. If you want it to look more realistic, this is how you make it look realistic. If you want it to make it look fantastic or freaky, then you certainly have plenty of ways to make it do that too. All right. Oh. Sure. Yes.
So this is kind of what I did. I set up the Zoom camera and then I also.
Well, it's interesting, but it doesn't look real.
No, it doesn't look real.
And if you don't want it to look real, that's one thing. But if you do want it to look real, then you don't animate the middle ground.
Yeah, I mean, I could just to get rid of that. I mean, I could just do the Zoom. I just did the Zoom on the camera. That doesn't look real either.
No, because the background's not moving. It's not a proper zoom. This is more like a dolly in from the position.
Right, exactly.
So it's behaving more like a dolly. So let's see how
I just set it up with the camera, with the null check.
Oh, sure, yeah, that'll work.
And have
It's a
it
pick
set
whip,
up with
that's
the
fine.
pick whip.
I know. You're like the drizzle. No, it's the pick whip. Oh, okay, well,
That's it,
fine.
pick whip.
Yeah.
Yeah, so all I did is, you know, the first thing I did was I moved the null.
I can't remember what it's called.
But it's, you know, it's like just this Zoom effect. Is what I
No, I'm wondering why the background is not zooming as well. Because the zoom is a camera effect.
Maybe because it's only on one layer.
Well, why is it? What is it? It's only one layer. I'm curious. A camera affects everything that's in it. Are these other layers not 3D?
That's all I did.
Scroll down and see.
They get help, but we can't.
Yeah, they're
those
not
are
3D.
my tax dollars. I'm like,
Yeah,
I said,
3D, and suddenly
it's the
you're like,
class
where'd they
of
go?
Republican.
Where'd who
She
go?
probably voted for
So,
Trump.
yeah,
She's
this
like,
is,
she's like,
this is
Eric,
part, it's like,
what you
you
see on
start by,
Fox
you
News.
follow this
That's
process,
fine.
you start by making
Like,
all 3D,
So,
and then
I said,
positioning where you want them,
'cause she
then
was telling
placing
me-
the camera, and then animating the
She
camera.
was going.
It's gonna seem more natural. If you
And
start with it
she starts
as,
looking at
and
it like,
I did it with all the layers showing too.
Right, and-
Because this was confusing.
That's
Like,
like,
they made it 3D and all black.
me.
It was like.
okay,
And so
that's
she's saying
why you
that,
use,
Yeah.
you can use this to, okay, well,
all
to
of
puzzle it
these
out,
things,
you click on
they
this,
have to
change
work
this view to the top
just as
view.
hard, if not harder,
See,
to get through the top.
Now it's gonna show you this, now you can zoom out some more to show everything, so if you
Just
just
to
do
be here.
3.1, actually go through. And that's all we've got, let's see what, actually, I think part of the problem now is that everything's on the same layer. They're not pushed into Z space, so let's talk about that.
And so, she
So
started
actually,
saying
we're gonna
this, and she
select
said,
all the
so
layers.
she was doing really well. And then she said,
Okay, so I can, now we can kind of make sense of it.
like, they didn't have to work
let's
very
start
hard,
with,
helping hand it to them, and they had
select
these programs that help
3
them.
PSD
And I said,
layers.
everything has to
So
work
just
the
click
same
on
as
the
everybody else.
You
Because you still have to do all the work. And she
And
says,
then hit
and she's,
P for position.
and they just can't.
So you can see that they're all, the Z levels are the same. So you want to
They
take the
go
background,
and
well,
get
actually, the
information,
foreground
just
I
like
leave
you're
it
sitting
zero.
here talking with me. I'm
The
very
background, you want to go
to
really
know
big.
how it works. So I start asking her, have you done your orientation?
Positive numbers, because positive will send it to the back.
And now some of her classes, when she's taking a class,
Oh, more.
start to time out, and she can't, like, 5 or 6 years, so she can't use the credits.
Oh,
And I
well,
didn't
all
know
three are
that.
selected, so
Not after
actually
like
just
5
select
years
the
or something
background
like
layer.
that. Yeah, you can't come back in and.
See how they're all,
Kind of package it.
just
No,
now.
then
when
you
you
start
click
to
it,
lose the credits after a certain period of time. I didn't know that. Anyway, she says, well. all these people
Yeah, that's telling
all
you
the
that
programs helping
it's
me. I
positioned
can't
up
get that
and,
help, so
but
that's
it's,
when I got
it's still
depressed.
pointing
I
that
started
blue
messing
arrow
up
with
and
the
crap.
Z.
And I said,
This is basically the three-dimensional. This will tell you the orientation. of
yeah,
that layer.
yeah, I'm gonna have to tell my
According to
supervisor
the camera.
about that, 'cause it was like-
So, what it's telling you right now is that
And
it's
they're-
That's why
above
about
where the
the
camera
all
is.
reactions.
They never say anything. So I just like just
So-
just a little bit deeper. I wanted to see, it was like, shoot, Elaine, everybody else was really easy.
If you choose low values, then you're only gonna be able to move the camera very, very slightly.
You know, I just wanted to tell you.
I would go much
moved over
larger
here just because
personally.
I'm
So when I did my
Wasn't
background
because-
was like 10,000.
No, I was just letting you know, it's
Yeah,
not
oh my God,
because of
it
you.
wasn't-
It's
Yeah.
because that
Like,
computer
oh.
just buzzed.
But see, even so, it's only moved that far back from this perspective. You can move it even further back.
Well, now I can be frustrated by being
Okay,
here.
that's actually
Still
not.
I can't do it, but I have my friend Satora here
Now
who
that you
can,
have it
yeah,
here,
exactly, not shutting down or not opening up the file, you know, that's
We'll
the
come back, we'll come back to this. For now, it's better, it's gonna be
Yeah.
easier for you to set this up
I
without.
did, I
having
right.
to see. So now
I
you've
didn't want
got
you to think anything.
this,
Okay, I
two
like
layers.
you.
We bonded.
Oh, okay.
So anyway.
No, it seems like you're, oh, I think part of it is that your foreground is also spaced. So the other thing we'll do is we'll select all of these, hit scale, you scale it's all over the place. So we will,
That was the
well,
perfect,
except for this
the
one,
perfect
foreground is
example.
so-
Yeah, but we just. And those are my tax dollars, I was like, really not being real. And you know what? Part of the whole thing, everybody that I want to do this, we work really hard to get through everything, but she hasn't even made
So you start
to
with
try to
three
work,
layers.
like, she's gonna blame it
Yeah.
on somebody else because of her failures.
Right. So, yes, and so you now have your foreground, your underground, your background, and they're all the same size right now.
190 people, and they're all like
Yeah.
35 or less, they have the turning
No.
to school, so.
Well,
it's really
the
kind of
idea
fun.
is that when you
Just
place them in the
talk
right
about
depth and then
different
scale them
people,
up,
that just really.
the matching will start to seem more natural. So
Okay.
now with this, with the background in the right location and placed correctly, we can scale this, so hit S for scale, and now you can change this
I
value
don't think
to
there's even
something.
nobody else for the fact that.
So just go drag and maybe even go
I
down.
wouldn't-
It's like
I would never say that, but that's the way I was like, I work
Go
so
even higher,
hard.
it's like, there's no
You don't
requirement
have
that you,
to do.
that you
And
use.
she makes it sound like, oh, you
Says.
Scaling is
just get it.
Exactly. So
No.
go to position, you can And you can use these to move up and down, or you can drag this to move it.
Right, that's what I was saying.
Yeah, what is this thing?
Because you
Yeah,
got
what is this?
What is that little green dot?
Yeah, what is that arrow doing?
Yeah.
And so you get to this point, and then now you're like, okay, the background's kind of where I want it for now. Now let's work on
I
the
didn't even know there was a sunburst in the.
Yeah. No. So again, you've got this, you already know that you want this to
I
be
just like
Yeah.
took her out and I was gonna introduce her to a
And if things don't, if things don't move fast enough while you're dragging, you hold down the shift
down on her and she had to do all this. I said,
Right.
whenever I go to the financial aid department, I had a scholarship I didn't even know I had because they never sent me the note. It's only because I went in there and they said, what's going on with this?
And
they
then
go,
when you
"Oh,
scale
you
this
got
up,
this scholarship.
that's
All
for
you have to do is
scale.
click accept it.
Over
And
here,
I was gonna get
and
$500
this
bucks.
is-
But I didn't know because they never sent me anything saying that that was the case. You always had to be checking.
So you get it into position so that
No,
now,
because she's
scene
well, I went over there.
looks
They don't have their stuff. I said,
this is still a little
They don't
large,
have
you
their
could
stuff
scale
yet.
this down. You
Right.
could scale
it's
down
your
the
job to
shoulder.
go over there and find out what's going on because no,
Yep,
they don't have their stuff
exactly.
together. That's what it means to be able to navigate through the system because
Because-
it's horrible.
Um,
You know,
80 might be
her
too
attitude
small,
was
so
the
you
reason
want
why
to do maybe
she
90 or
couldn't be
85 or
successful,
something like
is
that.
because all these people
Because
were
of the-
messing her around. I was like,
Yeah, exactly, just so that it fits into the
let me
frame.
try to compete with these.
Because if you, well, moving is fine, there's nothing wrong with
So
it.
you can see what my life is like. You know, you have a few little troubles, but for the rest of my life, every day I have issues with people treating me a certain way.
Well, you will have to move
After
it,
that,
that
I
was
took
a
her
given.
out to try to
But,
introduce her to
so, and
somebody.
now
in
you
the
can either
financial
move
aid
it by
department,
arrow keys, or
and she
you can
wasn't there, and I
drag
thought,
the arrows on the screen.
I should have turned around.
Position it
And I have a
where
friend who works in a documented little booth. His name is Eduardo. Really nice. He's always been really
Now,
nice to me.
now you've
Talk
got
and
it,
everything
you've
like
got
that.
it basically set up to where you
Part of
can
the
add a
problem,
camera,
he said,
and it
people
will-
like her, they don't know
a
anything
camera that you
about
animate
So I should have-
here
I
with
should
the
have
aid
looked
of
around,
radio.
seen if he was there and said, oh, Lizette, come here, I want to introduce you to somebody. So that she can start to get to, and by the end of the conversation, I gave her a hug and I said,
And then
listen,
you can pick a
I love you.
preset if
Do
you
whatever
wanna
need to
do,
But you have to be responsible.
I did 28.
Anybody out
Yeah,
here,
24
you
might be a
have to be
little
responsible.
bit. It's all good. What's gonna happen as soon as you do that is you're gonna have to make some adjustments. So
They're
if you
afraid
click
of anybody
OK,
they
you'll
don't
see
know.
things are changing. And so now you gotta go back and retweak the background scale and the.
Yeah, because President Trump never, you know, said, oh, here's the friends of yours.
Scale up one more. 500.
I mean, I didn't know.
Yeah,
I don't
exactly. You can,
care.
you can because
care.
again,
You know, it's
it's
like,
background. It's
so?
not required.
Everybody's got, I think that.
So,
Thank you for sharing. What? Yeah.
Click that signal. Yeah, if
So
you,
do you
if it
think
scales
it's
up and you press this, it hides it, so.
I love it.
Okay, that's good. Now, if you go up and add a camera,
Yeah.
oh, no, you've added
I
a
already
camera.
had the
That's
camera.
right, so now create an L object,
You mean you watch too? Oh,
make it a 3D
you
layer,
watch this.
make that null object a 3D layer. Now use the pivot. Okay,
This is where.
now you can take the camera and, if you want to, now if you want to do zoom, zoom will work correctly. You could zoom out a little bit. You can't zoom out a ton because
Oh,
the edges are going to show, but
If I
that's,
zoom in.
well, if you zoom in, it's obviously for detail shot or something like that. And so you can actually zoom up to there and it's still okay. Now it starts to fall apart. So you lose that edge and things. So if you're just going to zoom behaves exactly the way you would
And then
expect.
I would have to do a keyframe.
Well, okay, so now, but you're just gonna be worried about the position, keyframes, position and rotation of the null. So if you click on that and hit position and you keyframe this, you see that, yeah, you just kind of scrub it back and forth so that you can kind of get it. Oh, this is a side to side dolly, this is a down or jib or a crane
This is
shot.
not something that you
Or
just.
this is a push
You
in
have
or
to do it
push out.
exactly this way, otherwise.
So you can get to about there before this layer. So you might want to move
Just six. One
move this
project,
one further to the right and then.
And I ended up feeling like,
be able
Hey,
to do this kind of
one
movement.
project.
That kind of move like that, even if it's
So
that
it wasn't very
gradual and
much, but
slow,
now
it's actually selling
I know a
the, to
little
the
bit,
person
but
viewing that it's
I
like,
haven't taken
that's,
photos.
you know, they're like, wait, is that actually
Started
video?
talking the editing today. and
Yeah, you don't animate the layers individually if you can help it, because the point of it is that trying to manage the positions and scales and rotations of three things and have them coordinate successfully is much harder than
Okay, so.
setting them where they are
He
plausibly
was using
linked
Kate.
in terms of depth, and then use a camera the way a camera would work and move it through the space, and it would behave like a camera should. And all of the objects would be in the location as well.
You know? Yeah, I do too.
Which one?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you turn off those the background layers
From a book.
and turn off the
Well, you know what?
Oh, now you're just
Photoshop
showing
is his
the-
baby.
Sure.
If-
Wait.
He would
So
probably
you're missing-
teach everybody Photoshop before you taught them anything. because
You
that
just
was
have the
little-
background turned on.
Oh,
So
but
you just turn
Photoshop,
off
you can
the.
do this,
Yeah.
that,
Yeah,
this,
so-
that.
That's
Just,
almost
you
like
know,
I used to do that.
What you're seeing is you're seeing the default background
Yeah.
of your composition. So if you go up
Yeah.
to composition settings
But
and you
so,
look here, you see the background color is black, you can change that,
Yeah.
okay? It can be any color you want.
Not for
can
you.
Make it like,
Right.
or whatever. So
Oh,
you can choose whatever you want that background color to be.
And
If
you
you don't
can
want to
color
see a
it.
background color when you're looking at this
You know
view,
what I
you can
mean?
also turn it off like it's there.
I could put it as a with the rain and then export this as a flat file.
Oh yeah, well that's what a lot of,
that's the nice thing.
sure, and then you key it again, it's like, but if you
That's why he
wanted
tells you
to
take
see
editing classes.
transparency, you can just click that
You know that-
transparency grid, and then it'll show you the checkerboard just like you see in Photoshop or something like that. Well, yeah, it kind of gives you a little more visual indicator. Oh, what's transparent? What do I play with here? Okay. All right.
So,
I didn't get
I
through
only did half of project 8.
And I
Oh
said,
my God. Okay.
But I still got an
So-
editing class.
But
I did everything I could credit and I just do as much as I can.
Watches.
You know,
It all
because
kind
I
of
knew
comes
that
up.
there were gonna be some things that I wasn't as good at.
Okay.
So the final, I think I did really well on,
Yeah.
like, the first part of the final.
Okay.
I tripled the multiple choice, all that kind of stuff, but then I literally half of the editing process. I just felt like,
This is just you practice and play
but
with
I
it.
didn't get a chance to do all the final
It's
and
a
then
class
all of
exercise,
the
so if you look at
credits.
Yeah, I see that.
So the null, okay, so the idea is that
I don't remember, all I know is that I didn't finish. And
cameras,
then, when I looked up,
animating the camera sometimes
They were
can
like-
become very problematic for you.
6 or 7
The problem you run
people was
into
still
is
there. I said,
navigating
Brian,
when you're animating.
do you always have this many people? And you said, no. It's kind of like they're still
If
there
you're
at the
animating a
end of the
camera,
final.
you can animate the.
No, he
the X, Y, and Z.
tried to make it sound like
The trouble is that
normally
this is
everybody
a
gets
two
done,
note.
but I've been like the last person there. You know,
Right. If it's a one note camera, it will behave reasonably well.
last one to finish the final?
Position. If you have it, you are using
Well,
a
all I
null
know is I
for,
didn't finish.
for control, if you do have it parented
And
to,
I felt,
you should
like,
always animate the
because
null.
it was a hard final.
Because the point of it is the motion that you normally get out of the animating the camera. can
You know,
get
no, I take it as it comes. All I know is
very
that
simple to
I did
just
everything
use,
plus, just in case I fell down in certain areas. And I got 100 on participation, you know?
That's all.
And then I did all the
The
extra
two note
credits,
cameras, it becomes.
and I go out of my way to do the best job that I possibly can, and that's all I can do.
So a one note camera, a two note camera,
So
the difference is that you have the point of interest in
Because
a two note
It's
camera.
my second to last class, what?
Meaning that if you move the camera,
It's over 100.
if you change the X position,
But I
which
didn't do
in
very
this
good
case,
on the
even if you
midterms.
change the X position, you
Go
see that
It's
it's
study the right
still,
stuff.
the
So I
camera's
got
still
like
locked.
22 out of 40, but on this, on the,
Where it's looking
I'm sorry, on the quiz, I didn't get a very good grade.
is
On
a
the
separate
midterm, I
key
got like
frame thing. And
52.5,
unfortunately, it
and
doesn't
then
have the
I should
ability
have got 2
to
more points because I put
separate
composition
X,
with
Y,
an
and
S
Z
on the
position.
end. He said he was gonna change it. So I should have got like
because now you're like, wait, I have the keyframe point of interest. To move the camera successfully, like dolly,
Out of
you have the
60 years.
keyframe point of interest and
Yeah.
the
So
position.
I know I did
Same
very good.
time.
Look for everything I studied. And I printed
And
out
that
all of the different notes like that. I studied all those. And I really
comparing this
studied
to null objects, you can move the null
half the
object
stuff.
and the camera. So it's, I don't know, it's a preference to a lot of things, but in terms of how camera rotation happens, it's rotating based on the point of interest as opposed to when you rotate the camera here, you're rotating here.
Right now, because I went to
Whereas
film
if you
festival
rotate here,
and I got like 10 points.
you rotate.
Going to film festival volunteering. For his film festival, it's basketball.
So, I could point to you as.
Yeah, he did.
No, a Tuno, no, it's a Tuno is a camera where the area thing, where the target, what it's looking at is a fixed.
So anyway,
That's
that
the
means
thing.
a lady went down there.
Point of interest, what Tuno camera is, the camera is locked onto a certain thing. Move the camera, you can do whatever you want with the camera, you can look at the camera, you
I
can
got
spin it
free
around.
tickets because I
Oh, you
volunteered
can
and
look
I
at the
went
same
and saw a
time.
really good movie and I got 10 points.
So you want
And
to
he
follow
followed me,
something,
so I
you
figured,
say,
well, it was
oh,
worth it.
I want that point of interest to follow this object, and the camera will follow that wherever it goes.
But what?
Separate subject.
Well, you know what? The other thing is what you said.
The idea of
It's
of
50%
letting go
of your
animating
projects,
and
so.
all doing here is just.
Yeah, your projects, not of the
Choose
whole,
to
your
do
whole
this
grade.
as a practice. It becomes, it's a little more familiar, and it's also generally how if you were to go work with somebody.
How could you do a lot of extra credit? There wasn't a lot of. Oh, you mean on each of the projects, you go above board and try to make
This
it.
is kind of the standard practice. So it's like, you create a 3D camera, you create an all
Yeah, but that was only on one assignment. Yeah, it was only on one. And I did it and I got 2 extra points, you know?
Now,
But-
again, when you look here at how
But
those.
that was only on one.
If you
Because I was
change
asking, I said,
this,
how do I get extra credit? And that's when I found out.
this is,
Same
this is
thing.
rotating from the
I
point of
started
view
taking this
of
class next year.
the
That's
object. Okay? Whereas this is rotating from the point of view.
Really? Oh, thank you.
So this is more like a pure tilt up and down from a. This is more like pure. But
Are you going up this way or this way?
these have some force as well. Very kind of interesting,
In the lot over there? Where'd you park?
ways to, it's like moving the whole camera. If you
Oh, I
actually
thought you-
watch how the camera moves on this screen, top down, you see, watch what the camera does. Rotate it. Moving around that way. Rotate it from here. to there. Null object generally is going to give you, especially for dolly motion, it's going to be more useful. Especially the two things. So you can animate a camera without using the null, but you don't want to do it. As soon as you let go of that, it behaves. So it just gives you some more options. Thank you. Okay? Yeah, I try not to overthink it too much. It's just, again, my practice is create a 3D camera. Okay, great. Now create an all object, make it 3D. Because that workflow is what a lot of many people before use. Okay, thanks. All right. Yes.
I have a question.
You have a question.
Not
I have an
necess-
answer.
Not necessarily about the,
Okay.
why can't I get the hand?
Oh,
For the.
because you have more than one selected.
Oh, this is all just.
Oh, because so they're all linked together. That's the other reason. Okay, so click here and it will would split them all apart. Okay?
Change the shape.
That's all right. That doesn't matter. Now they're all independent of each other. Now you can select. I can't see that short. Right?
I was like,
Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to affect the motion. Well, the reason why they don't let you do it when they're all linked together is because the motion you're trying to create is more mathematically complicated than After Effects is prepared to do with them all linked together. It treats them all of those coordinates have the same velocity values and influence values when you have them all linked together. Okay? When you want them to have separate values for velocity and influence, which is what those mean, then you have to split them. Okay, great.
I'm used to graph editors, do maybe like 3D.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So I was just wondering, like, I think.
Why is it not? Yeah, well, it's not the same as 3ds Max.
Yeah, it's not quite the
Not quite the same. But it's similar enough that you can leverage that. That's good.
same, understand how it
Yeah.
looks. But the graph is supposed to be the same.
What you should expect to see and what you can hope to get away with. Yes, all of those things are true. All right, so I can shut down this. I don't think anyone else is going to use it tonight.